I watched them through my phone screen, scrolling through the vacation photos my mother had accidentally tagged me in. There they were, my parents, my brother Scott, his wife Melody, and their 3 children splashing in the crystal-clear waters of the Hawaiian resort my parents had been talking about for years. The once-in-a-lifetime family vacation they'd been saving for, planning meticulously, promised would be the ultimate bonding experience for the grandchildren. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The same vacation I was told just wouldn't work with your kids coming along. The same vacation my children, Emma, age 8, and Jackson, age 6, had been explicitly uninvited from, with my mother explaining that they're just too young to appreciate it and they wouldn't be able to participate in most activities anyway. I zoomed in on one particular photo, my niece Lily, who had just turned 5, building a sandcastle with my father. Lily, who was a year younger than my son Jackson. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I set my phone down carefully on the kitchen counter, took a deep breath, and glanced at the clock. 3:15 p.m. My kids would be home from school in 15 minutes, excitedly asking if Grandma and Grandpa had sent any more postcards from their big trip. They'd been promised souvenirs, special ones, just for you, as a consolation prize for being left behind. They didn't know yet that this wasn't just about a vacation. They didn't understand the years of subtle favoritism, the pattern of my brother's children being prioritized while mine were sidelined. They were too young to see what had taken me far too long to accept. But I finally saw it clearly now. And, as I prepared the after-school snacks with mechanical precision, I knew that the decision I had made over the past sleepless week would change everything going forward. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. The morning the photos appeared on my feed started like any other Tuesday. I was preparing breakfast for the kids, half listening to the local morning news while scrambling eggs and toasting bread. Emma was quizzing Jackson on his spelling words for the day, her little voice serious and teacher-like as she sat cross-legged on the kitchen chair. "Mom, when are Grandma and Grandpa coming back from their big trip?" Jackson asked, looking up from his spelling list. "In 5 more days, buddy," I replied, sliding the eggs onto their plates. "Remember how we marked it on the calendar? They'll be back next Sunday." "I hope they bring me that shell necklace like they promised," Emma said, carefully arranging her eggs so they didn't touch her toast. "Grandma said it would be made by real Hawaiian people." "I'm sure they will, sweetie," I assured her, though something in my gut tightened at the mention of promises. After dropping the kids at school, I stopped by my favorite coffee shop, treating myself to a caramel latte before heading home to catch up on some work emails. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and I had a logo design due for a local bakery by the end of the week. As I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, the notification on my phone caught my attention. "Catherine Andrews has tagged you in 27 photos." My mother rarely used social media, and when she did, it was usually to share a single, carefully selected photo of a family gathering or holiday. 27 photos was unprecedented. Curious, I opened the app and froze. The first image showed my parents standing on a pristine beach, arms around Scott and Melody, their 3 children arranged perfectly in front of them, all wearing matching Hawaiian shirts in varying sizes, all smiling broadly at the camera. The caption read, "First day of our Andrews family vacation, making memories that will last a lifetime with the people who matter most." I felt like I'd been slapped. I scrolled through more photos, each one more painful than the last. My father is teaching my nephew Max how to snorkel. My mother built sandcastles with Lily. Scott and Melody enjoying a sunset dinner with my parents, coconut drinks in hand, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. The family vacation had expanded beyond just my parents and Scott's family. There were photos with my Aunt Susan and Uncle Bill, my mother's sister and her husband. Even though my cousin Rachel and her husband had joined them, their teenage son featured prominently in several beach activities. It wasn't just a grandparent trip with Scott's kids. It was a full family vacation, a family vacation my children, and I had been explicitly told we weren't invited to. 6 weeks earlier, my mother had called to discuss summer plans. Her voice had that careful, measured tone she used when delivering what she considered difficult news. "Allison, your father and I have been saving for this special trip to Hawaii," she'd explained. "We're planning to take Scott's kids. It's going to be a wonderful bonding experience for us with the grandchildren." "That sounds great, Mom," I replied, genuinely happy for them. "Emma and Jackson will be so excited. They've been watching those Hawaiian documentaries since you mentioned possibly going someday." There was a pause, the kind that stretches uncomfortably until you realize something is wrong. "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss," she said finally. "We've thought about this carefully, and we think Emma and Jackson are just too young for this trip." Emma gets anxious in new situations, and Jackson is still so active and energetic. They wouldn't appreciate the cultural experiences, and frankly, they wouldn't be able to participate in most of the activities we have planned. I remember gripping the phone tighter, stunned into momentary silence. "Mom, Jackson is 6. Lily is 5. How is she not too young, but he is?" "Lily is different," my mother had replied. "She's always been more mature. And with Max and Ava being older, they can help with her. Your kids need constant supervision." "As opposed to what, Mom?" "All children need supervision. Emma and Jackson are well-behaved kids. They're not perfect, but neither are Scott's children." The conversation had deteriorated from there, with my mother bringing up isolated incidents from years ago. Emma's meltdown at a restaurant when she was 4, Jackson's energetic exploration of my parents' living room that had resulted in a broken vase last Christmas. Each example offered as evidence that my children weren't ready for such an important trip. "We just want it to be perfect, Allison," my mother had insisted. "This is something we've been saving for. We'll take Emma and Jackson somewhere when they're older." I had acquiesced eventually, swallowing my hurt and disappointment, telling myself that my parents had the right to choose how to spend their time and money. I had even helped Emma and Jackson make a special card wishing their grandparents and cousins a wonderful trip, choking back tears as my children, without a hint of resentment, asked to pick out small going-away gifts for their cousins so they won't miss us too much. But now, staring at the photos, I realized I'd been deceived. This wasn't about my children being too young or too active. This wasn't about them not appreciating cultural experiences. If those had been the real concerns, Lily would have been left behind too. No, this was something else entirely. I scrolled back through the feed, looking at older posts from my parents and brother. A pattern began to emerge that I had either never noticed or had deliberately ignored. My parents attended virtually every one of my nieces and nephews' school performances and sports games, despite living the same 30-minute drive from both our houses. They regularly took Scott's children for weekend sleepovers, something they'd only done twice with Emma and Jackson, both times after persistent asking on my part. There were birthday celebration photos where my parents had gone all out for Max, Ava, and Lily, elaborate themed parties, expensive gifts prominently displayed. By contrast, my children's birthdays were acknowledged with a card containing a modest check and occasionally a brief visit if it fit into their schedule. I felt a cold realization wash over me. This wasn't a one-time slight. This was a pattern of favoritism so blatant that I wondered how I had failed to truly see it until now. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Oops, didn't mean to tag you in those Hawaii photos. Having a wonderful time. We'll call when we're back on the mainland. Hope the kids are enjoying their summer camps." The casual dismissal, the lack of awareness, or worse, the deliberate cruelty, made something shift inside me. The constant making of excuses for my parents, the rationalization of their behavior, the acceptance of being second best. It all stopped at that moment. I stood up from my desk, feeling oddly calm as I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady as I poured the hot water, added honey, and stirred slowly. My mind, however, was racing through years of memories, recontextualizing them with this new clarity. There was Christmas when Scott's family received significantly more elaborate gifts than mine. Well, they have 3 children, so naturally, there are more presents, I had reasoned to myself. There was the time my parents offered to pay for Max's specialized sports camp, but claimed they couldn't contribute to Emma's art program that cost half as much. They must be having financial concerns right now, I had thought. There was the family dinner where my father had spent the entire evening discussing Max's baseball achievements while showing minimal interest in Jackson's excited sharing about his science project. Dad's just more interested in sports than science, I had explained to my disappointed son later. Each instance, viewed individually, could be explained away. Viewed collectively, they told a story I had been avoiding. My children were less favored, less valued, less loved by their grandparents than their cousins were. I took my tea to the back porch and sat watching the birds at the feeder, feeling a strange mix of grief and liberation. The grief was for the grandparent relationship I had always wanted for my children, the one I had pretended existed despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The liberation came from finally acknowledging the truth and recognizing that I had the power to decide what happened next. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was my brother Scott. "Hey, Allie," he said, his voice relaxed and happy, the sound of waves crashing in the background. "How are things back home?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. "Fine," I replied, my voice more controlled than I expected. "Looks like you're having quite the family vacation." There was a pause. "Yeah, it's been amazing. The kids are having a blast with Mom and Dad. The resort is incredible." "I can see that from the photos," I said, "including the ones with Aunt Susan, Uncle Bill, and Rachel's family." Another pause, longer this time. "Look, Allie, I know you're probably upset that my kids were specifically excluded from a family vacation that now apparently includes extended family." "Yes, Scott. Upset is one word for it. Mom and Dad made that decision, not me," he said, defensively. "They said they talked to you about it. They told me Emma and Jackson were too young, that they wouldn't appreciate the experience or be able to participate in the activities. Yet somehow Lily, who's a year younger than Jackson, is old enough. Lily is she's just easier to—" Scott fumbled for words. "More what, Scott? More deserving? More loved?" "Don't be dramatic, Allie. It's not like that." "Then what is it like? Explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it looks like blatant favoritism. It looks like my children are consistently treated as less important, less worthy of time, attention, and experiences than yours." Scott's voice lowered, as if he was moving away from others to have this conversation privately. "Look, I don't know why Mom and Dad do what they do. I don't control their choices. But you benefit from them," I pointed out. "You accept the extra attention, the privileges, the special treatment, without ever questioning why your sister and her children are left out. What am I supposed to do? Refuse to let my kids see their grandparents because they don't treat yours exactly the same?" The question hung between us, and I realized I didn't have a ready answer. What did I expect from Scott? He wasn't creating the situation, but he was complicit in it, accepting the preferential treatment without questioning or challenging it. "I don't know what you should do," I finally said. "But I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop pretending this is normal or acceptable. I'm going to stop making excuses to my children about why their grandparents consistently choose their cousins over them. Allie, you're overreacting. It's just a vacation." "It's not just a vacation, Scott. It's years of small rejections and clear messages that my kids aren't as important, and I'm done with it." I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. The decision that had been forming since I saw those photos solidified in that moment. I would no longer expose my children to people who couldn't love them equally, who made them feel less worthy, less important, less deserving of love and attention. My children deserved better. And it was up to me to ensure they got it. I spent the next hour making 3 lists: practical steps, emotional support strategies, and boundaries. By the time I needed to leave to pick up Emma and Jackson from school, I had a plan, not just for how to handle the immediate situation, but for the path forward. As I drove to the school, I rehearsed what I would say to my children. I wouldn't disparage their grandparents or cousins. I wouldn't center the conversation around the vacation or the hurt I felt on their behalf. Instead, I would begin the process of helping them understand that family relationships are complex, that love should be demonstrated through actions, and that it's okay to create distance from relationships that consistently make you feel less than. It wouldn't be a single conversation, but rather the beginning of a new understanding of family, one built on genuine care and respect rather than obligation and denial. As Emma and Jackson bounded toward the car, backpacks bouncing and faces alight with the simple joy of another, school day completed, I felt a fierce surge of protective love. These beautiful, kind, imperfect children deserve to be cherished fully, not merely tolerated or occasionally indulged. "Mom, guess what?" Emma called as she climbed into the back seat. "Mrs. Peterson said my art project is being displayed in the main hallway." "That's wonderful, sweetie," I said, smiling genuinely at her excitement. "I can't wait to see it." And, "I got all my spelling words right," Jackson added, buckling his seatbelt. "Even necessary, and that's a hard one." "I'm so proud of you both," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As we drove home, the kids chatting about their day, I felt strangely peaceful despite the emotional turmoil of the morning. The path ahead would be difficult in many ways, but it was the right one. My children would learn that they deserved to be valued, that their worth wasn't determined by others' ability to see it, and that sometimes the healthiest families are the ones we choose. And somewhere in that lesson was a gift far more valuable than any Hawaiian vacation could ever be. The evening after discovering the Hawaii photos, I sat on the edge of Emma's bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead, as she drifted toward sleep. Her room was a testament to her creative spirit, walls adorned with her artwork, bookshelves overflowing with stories that fueled her imagination, and a cherished collection of snow globes arranged meticulously on her windowsill. "Mom?" she murmured sleepily. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa are having fun in Hawaii?" My heart clenched. Even now there was no resentment in her voice, only genuine hope that her grandparents were enjoying themselves. "I'm sure they are, sweetie," I replied softly. "Hawaii is a beautiful place. When we go someday, can we see the volcanoes? I read about them in my science book." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Absolutely. We'll see everything you want to see." After she fell asleep, I checked on Jackson, already in dreamland, clutching the stuffed dinosaur he insisted he was too big for, but somehow always ended up with at night. His science fair ribbon was pinned proudly to his bulletin board, the third-place award that had meant the world to him, but that my parents had been too busy to attend. As I made my way downstairs to my home office, memories began to surface. Not just of recent slights, but of the long history that had led to this moment. Understanding the present required looking at the past, and as I settled into my desk chair with a glass of wine, I allowed myself to revisit the story of our family dynamics from the beginning. I was born Allison Marie Carter in Springfield, Missouri, the first child of Catherine and Richard Carter. My early childhood memories are warm ones, being twirled in my father's arms in our backyard, baking cookies with my mother on rainy afternoons, the uncomplicated love that flowed between parent and child. For those first 5 years, I was the center of their world, the recipient of their undivided attention and affection. Then came Scott, 5 years my junior, and the family dynamic shifted in ways I was too young to fully comprehend, but old enough to feel acutely. Scott was a beautiful baby, cheerful, with our father's blue eyes and our mother's dimpled smile. He rarely cried, slept through the night almost immediately, and reached every milestone with impressive speed. My parents were besotted, and who could blame them? He was, by all accounts, an easy child to love. I, on the other hand, had entered a more challenging phase. Suddenly expected to be the big girl and help with the baby, I struggled with the abrupt redistribution of attention. Normal childhood mishaps, spilled juice, forgotten homework, typical 10-year-old attitude, were no longer met with the patient guidance of my earlier years, but with exasperated sighs and comparisons to my seemingly perfect little brother. "Why can't you be more like Scott?" became a refrain that echoed throughout my adolescence, though never stated quite so directly. It was conveyed in subtler ways, the bright smile that greeted his report card versus the cursory nod at mine, the elaborate birthday celebrations for him versus the increasingly simplified ones for me. The way my mother's voice softened when she spoke his name. I opened my laptop and found myself looking at old family photos, digitized from albums years ago. There I was at 16, standing slightly apart in family vacation photos, my smile a bit forced while Scott, at 11, was often centered, my father's arm around his shoulder. There were twice as many photos of his middle school graduation as there had been of mine. His sporting events were documented extensively, my debate team victories mentioned only in passing. This wasn't revisionist history born of current hurt. The evidence had always been there in frozen moments, telling a story I'd worked hard not to see. By the time we reached adulthood, the pattern was firmly established. Scott attended my parents' alma mater on a combination of scholarships and their generous financial support. I chose a state university with an excellent design program, working part-time to cover expenses my parents deemed unnecessary. "You've always been so independent, Allie," my mother would say, as if my self-sufficiency was a character flaw that justified their uneven investment. Scott became an accountant, joining a prestigious firm in our hometown. Practical, reliable, following in our father's financial footsteps. I pursued graphic design, building a freelance business that allowed me the flexibility to eventually balance work and motherhood. Creative, somewhat unconventional, decidedly not the path my parents had envisioned. I took a sip of wine and clicked through more photos, landing on one from 10 years ago, my wedding to Daniel Webster. We looked so young, so hopeful, standing beneath an arch of wildflowers at the small botanical garden where we'd chosen to exchange vows. My parents stood to one side, my mother's smile tight as she surveyed the casual, budget-conscious celebration that reflected our personalities rather than her preferences. She had pushed for a church wedding, a formal reception, traditions that felt hollow to us but meaningful to her. When we gently held our ground, she withdrew much of the financial support initially offered, leaving us to finance the majority of the event ourselves. "It's your day," she had said with a sigh. "I just hope you won't regret these choices later." By contrast, when Scott married Melody 3 years later, my parents covered the cost of their elaborate country club wedding without hesitation. My mother spent months helping Melody select the perfect venue, florist, photographer, and menu. The disparate treatment was explained away with casual remarks. "Well, Melody doesn't have a mother to help her with these things." Or, "Scott's just never been good with these details." I shut the laptop, unwilling to torture myself with more evidence of the imbalance I'd normalized for so long. The truth was, I had spent decades making excuses for my parents' obvious preference for Scott and his choices. I'd convinced myself that love wasn't finite, that their affection for him didn't diminish their feelings for me, that family dynamics were complex and not everything could be perfectly equal. Some of that was true, of course. Love isn't finite, and perfect equality in family relationships is probably impossible. But there's a vast difference between minor imbalances and systematic favoritism, a difference I had refused to acknowledge until now. Daniel and I had been happy, despite my parents' lukewarm embrace of our life together. We'd built a beautiful marriage based on genuine partnership, mutual respect, and shared values. When Emma arrived 8 years ago, we were overjoyed, marveling at her serious, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything, her determination evident even as an infant. Jackson followed 2 years later, a bundle of energy and curiosity from his first moments. My parents had seemed genuinely pleased with their first grandchild, visiting us in the hospital and helping during those exhausting early weeks. But by the time Jackson was born, Scott and Melody had welcomed Max, and my parents' attention had already begun to shift. Their visits to meet Jackson were brief, their offers of help perfunctory rather than genuine. "Your mother is spending a few weeks with Scott and Melody," my father had explained when I'd called, overwhelmed with a colicky newborn and a toddler who was struggling to adjust. "Max is having some feeding issues, and Melody needs the support. We'll try to come see the new baby when things settle down there." It was the first clear indication that the pattern from my childhood would extend to the next generation, though I desperately tried to convince myself otherwise. Daniel had seen it more clearly than I had. "Your parents are missing out," he would say when they canceled yet another visit or showed minimal interest in our children's milestones. "These kids are incredible, and if they can't see that, it's their loss." I reached for my phone and scrolled to Daniel's contact, my thumb hovering over the call button. Though we'd been divorced for nearly 3 years now, we'd maintained a strong co-parenting relationship. He would understand my anger, validate my decision to create boundaries. But this was a night for reflection, not action, and I set the phone aside, promising myself I would talk to him tomorrow. Our divorce had been another chapter in the ongoing story of my parents' uneven treatment of their children. When Daniel and I announced our separation, an amicable decision made after months of counseling and careful consideration, my parents had barely concealed their relief. They had never fully embraced Daniel, finding his career as a high school history teacher lacking in ambition, his passionate interest in environmental causes somewhat radical, his choice to take a 3-year career pause to be a stay-at-home dad, when I received a significant professional opportunity, incomprehensible. "Well, perhaps now you'll find someone more suitable," my mother had said during one of our rare private conversations after the divorce was finalized. "More suitable than a loving father to my children? A kind man who still respects me even though our marriage didn't work? Someone who supported my career even at the expense of his own advancement?" I had countered, genuinely perplexed by her assessment. "You know what I mean, Allison. Someone more established." By contrast, Scott's marriage was held up as the ideal, traditional in its structure, with Melody working part-time as a dental hygienist, while Scott provided the primary income, their lifestyle closely mirroring our parents' own choices. The fact that Daniel and I had chosen a different path, one that prioritized both our careers at different times, one that valued personal fulfillment alongside financial success, was seen as evidence of flawed judgment rather than different, but equally valid priorities. Poured myself another half glass of wine and moved to the living room sofa, curling up under the hand-woven throw that Daniel had brought back from a summer teaching program in Peru. Our divorce had been painful, but necessary. Both of us eventually, accepting that we had grown in different directions despite the deep friendship and respect that remained. We still came together easily for family events, birthday celebrations, school functions, united in our commitment to giving Emma and Jackson a secure foundation despite our changed relationship. My parents had never understood this either, making uncomfortable comments about blurred boundaries and suggesting that our amicable co-parenting was confusing for the children. They seemed to want a cleaner break, perhaps even an antagonistic one that would further distance Daniel from the family. When that didn't materialize, they simply decreased their already minimal involvement in our lives, focusing ever more attention on Scott's seemingly perfect nuclear family. I gazed around the living room, at the life I'd built despite their lack of support or approval. The home I'd purchased after the divorce, carefully selected to be in the same school district, with a bedroom for each child and a dedicated office space for my growing design business. The walls were adorned with my children's artwork alongside pieces from local artists I admired. Bookshelves filled with diverse stories and perspectives I wanted Emma and Jackson to explore. Evidence everywhere of a life lived intentionally, with purpose and joy. For years, I had maintained the pretense that my parents' approval mattered, that their validation would somehow complete me. I had swallowed hurt, rationalized their behavior, and worked overtime to ensure my children didn't perceive their grandparents' emotional absence. I had made excuses when they missed school performances, but attended every one of my nieces' and nephews' events. I had explained away forgotten birthdays, half-hearted holiday visits, and the obvious disparity in attention and affection. But the Hawaii photos had crystallized something I'd been slowly acknowledging for years. My parents' approval was never coming. Not for me, not for my choices, and most painfully, not for my children, who had done nothing to deserve their tepid interest beyond being born to the less favored child. The realization brought grief but also clarity. I could continue the exhausting work of managing my children's expectations, cushioning their disappointments, and pretending that the relationship with their grandparents was normal and healthy. Or I could acknowledge the reality, protect them from the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from continual rejection, and redirect our emotional energy toward people who genuinely valued us. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Melody, my brother's wife. Allie, Scott told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're upset about the trip. I hope you understand it wasn't our decision about who came along. Looking forward to catching up when we're back. The message was classic Melody, conciliatory on the surface while subtly reinforcing that she and Scott bore no responsibility for the situation. In the early years of their marriage, I had genuinely liked Melody, finding her warm and engaging. But as time passed, I'd watched her adapt to the family dynamic, becoming increasingly comfortable with the preferential treatment, occasionally even leveraging it to ensure her children received special considerations. I didn't respond to the text. What could I say that wouldn't either escalate the situation or require me to swallow my dignity once again? Instead, I set my empty wine glass on the coffee table and reached for the notebook where I'd started outlining my plan that afternoon. The practical steps were straightforward. No more unrestricted access to my children, no more last-minute accommodations of my parents' sporadic interest, no more pretending that all was well to spare everyone's feelings but my own and my children's. The emotional support strategies were more complex. How to explain the changing relationship to Emma and Jackson without burdening them with adult concerns. How to build a stronger community of chosen family around them. How to help them process inevitable feelings of rejection without internalizing them. And the boundaries. Those would be the most challenging to implement, but also the most essential. No more accepting scraps of attention as if they were feasts. No more pretending that indifference didn't hurt. No more protecting my parents from the consequences of their choices at the expense of my children's emotional well-being. As I reviewed the notes I'd made, a sense of purpose replaced the hurt that had dominated the day. This wasn't just about a vacation or even about the years of unequal treatment. It was about refusing to participate any longer in a dynamic that harmed the two people I was most responsible for protecting. Emma and Jackson deserved to be surrounded by people who delighted in them, who showed up consistently, who demonstrated in word and deed that they were cherished. If my parents couldn't or wouldn't be those people, then I needed to create enough distance to allow others to fill those roles instead. I closed the notebook and headed upstairs to check on my sleeping children one more time before bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I had taken the first step toward a healthier future for all of us, acknowledging the truth I had been avoiding for far too long. As I passed Jackson's room, I noticed the construction paper, card he had made for my parents before their trip, still sitting on his dresser. "Have fun in Hawaii, Grandma and Grandpa. I love you even bigger than a volcano," he had written in his careful 6-year-old printing, decorating the borders with drawings of palm trees and ocean waves. I picked it up, running my fingers over the colorful illustrations, the unconditional love expressed in every crayon stroke. This was what my parents couldn't see: the beautiful, open-hearted gift of my children's affection, freely given despite so little encouragement. Their loss, I thought, as I carefully placed the card back on the dresser. And from now on, I would make sure it was only their loss, not my children's. The morning after my discovery of the Hawaii photos, I woke before my alarm, my mind already active with the decisions that lay ahead. The house was quiet, Emma and Jackson still asleep in their rooms, the soft morning light filtering through the kitchen windows as I made coffee and settled at the counter with my laptop. I had promised myself I wouldn't act rashly, wouldn't make emotionally charged decisions I might later regret. But I also wouldn't fall back into the familiar pattern of excusing, rationalizing, and ultimately accepting my parents' behavior. Finding the balance between these two imperatives would require careful thought and planning. My first call was to Daniel. Despite our divorce, he remained my most trusted advisor when it came to matters involving our children. He answered on the third ring, his voice still rough with sleep. "Allie, everything okay with the kids?" "They're fine," I assured him quickly. "Still sleeping. But something's happened that we need to discuss, ideally, before they wake up." Over the next 15 minutes, I explained the situation, the Hawaii vacation, the false reasons for excluding our children, the photographic evidence of extended family members who had been included instead. Daniel listened without interrupting, though I could hear his breathing change, growing more measured as it did when he was controlling his anger. "I always knew your parents played favorites, but this is beyond the pale," he finally said. "What are you thinking of doing?" "That's why I'm calling. I need to make decisions that protect Emma and Jackson emotionally, but I don't want to overreact or put them in the middle of adult conflict." Daniel was silent for a moment before responding. "You know, when we were married, I used to push for confronting your parents about how they treated our kids compared to Scott's. You always resisted, saying that making waves would only make things worse. Maybe you were right then, I don't know. But I think we're past that point now." He was right. For years, I had avoided direct confrontation, employing a strategy of gentle nudges, subtle reminders, and careful management of expectations. I had hoped that with enough time and patience, my parents would develop the same loving relationship with my children that they had with Scott's. But the Hawaii trip had demonstrated the futility of that approach. "I agree," I said, "but I want to be strategic, not reactive. Whatever steps I take need to be purposeful, designed to establish clear boundaries while minimizing the emotional impact on the kids." "So what's your plan?" Daniel asked, now fully awake and engaged. "First, I need to document the pattern, not for anyone else but for myself, to maintain clarity when the inevitable guilt trips and justifications start coming. Second, I need to consult with Dr. Martinez about how to discuss this with Emma and Jackson in age-appropriate ways. And third, I need to craft a clear message to my parents about what will change going forward. Dr. Elena Martinez was the family therapist who had helped us navigate our divorce 3 years earlier. She had worked with both the children and us as parents, guiding us toward the healthy co-parenting relationship we now maintained. Her insights would be invaluable in addressing this new family challenge. "That sounds reasonable," Daniel said. "Want me to take the kids this weekend? Give you some space to work through this?" Though we shared custody equally, with a week-on, week-off arrangement, Daniel never hesitated to offer additional time when needed. It was one of the many reasons our post-divorce relationship worked so well. Neither of us kept score. Both of us prioritized the children's needs above all else. "Actually, I'd rather stick to our usual schedule," I replied. I don't want to disrupt their routine right now, but I would appreciate it if you could come over for dinner tonight. I think we should present a united front when we talk to them." "Absolutely," Daniel agreed without hesitation. "Text me what you want me to bring. And Allie, I'm proud of you for drawing this line. It's been a long time coming." After we hung up, I switched gears from concerned mother to methodical researcher. Opening a new document, I began constructing a timeline of incidents that, viewed collectively, painted an unmistakable picture of favoritism. I included specific dates where possible. The Christmas when my parents spent $50 on each of my children, while Scott's received gaming systems, designer clothes, and expensive sports equipment. The school concert where they arrived late for Emma's solo but took the day off work to attend Max's baseball tournament. The summer they took Scott's children to their lake house for 2 weeks, but claimed they couldn't manage my energetic kids for more than a weekend. I noted their reactions to milestones. Effusive praise for every accomplishment of Scott's children contrasted with perfunctory acknowledgement of my own kids' achievements. I documented the frequency of their visits, the disparity in birthday celebrations, the pattern of last-minute cancellations when plans involved Emma and Jackson. The exercise was painful, but clarifying. Seeing these incidents collected in one place removed any lingering doubt about whether I was overreacting to a single slight. The Hawaii trip wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of years of systematic preferential treatment. At 7:30, I heard the familiar sounds of my children stirring, Jackson's bedroom door opening, Emma's softer footsteps padding down the hall to the bathroom. I closed the document and shifted my focus to providing a normal morning routine, keeping my voice light as I helped them prepare breakfast and gather their school things. "Is Dad coming over tonight?" Emma asked, picking up on my brief mention of dinner plans. "Yes, he'll be here around 6. I thought we'd make that pasta bake you both like." "The one with the crunchy top?" Jackson asked, perking up immediately. "That's the one," I confirmed, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Is it a special occasion?" Emma questioned, her perceptiveness sometimes startling me. At 8, she was developing an acute awareness of unspoken emotional currents. "Not really. Dad and I just want to talk to you both about something, but it's nothing to worry about." She studied my face for a moment before nodding, apparently satisfied that whatever conversation was coming wasn't cause for concern. After dropping them at school, I returned home to continue executing my plan. My next step was scheduling an appointment with Dr. Martinez. Her office managed to fit me in for a virtual consultation during her lunch break, and at noon, I was explaining the situation to her familiar face on my laptop screen. "I'm not surprised to hear about this escalation," she said after I'd outlined the Hawaii situation and my decision to establish firmer boundaries. "During our sessions when the divorce was happening, you mentioned similar patterns of favoritism. What's different now that's triggered this response?" "I think I've finally accepted that things won't change," I replied. "I've spent years hoping that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, accommodating enough, my parents would eventually treat my children with the same love and attention they give to Scott's. The Hawaii trip has forced me to acknowledge that's not going to happen." Dr. Martinez nodded. "That's an important recognition. So your question is about how to explain these changing boundaries to Emma and Jackson without burdening them with adult concerns." "Exactly. They adore their grandparents, despite the uneven attention. I don't want to damage that relationship, but I also need to protect them from the subtle message that they're somehow less worthy of love." She considered this for a moment. "Children are remarkably perceptive, Allison. Even if you've never discussed it, I suspect Emma and Jackson have already internalized some awareness of the disparity in treatment." The thought sent a pang through my heart. "So what do I tell them?" "The key is to be truthful without assigning blame. Focus on what will happen rather than why it's happening. For children their age, concrete information about changes in routine is more important than detailed explanations of adult motivations." Dr. Martinez went on to suggest specific language I could use, emphasizing the importance of reassuring the children that they had done nothing wrong, that they were deeply loved by many people, and that sometimes adults make decisions that can feel confusing or hurtful. You might say something like, "We're going to be spending less time with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. Dad and I have noticed that these visits sometimes leave you feeling disappointed, and we want to make sure you're spending time with people who can give you the attention you deserve," she suggested. "What if they ask why their grandparents took their cousins to Hawaii but not them?" I asked, anticipating the question that would inevitably arise once my parents returned. Again, be truthful, but appropriate. "Grandma and Grandpa made a choice that Dad and I disagree with. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes adults make mistakes or choices that hurt people's feelings, even when they're family." By the end of our 30-minute session, I had a clearer framework for the conversation with my children, and confirmation that establishing boundaries with my parents was not only justified, but necessary for Emma and Jackson's emotional health. "Remember," Dr. Martinez said as we were concluding, "children develop their sense of self-worth largely from how they perceive they're valued by the adults in their lives. By ensuring they're primarily surrounded by people who demonstrate genuine love and interest, you're protecting their fundamental understanding of their own worthiness." After the call, I turned my attention to crafting the message I would eventually deliver to my parents. I wanted it to be clear and direct without being unnecessarily harsh or accusatory. This wasn't about punishing them or extracting an apology. It was about establishing new parameters for our relationship going forward. I opened another document and began drafting points I wanted to cover. The Hawaii trip had made clear a pattern of differential treatment that could no longer be ignored or excused. Emma and Jackson deserved relationships with adults who consistently demonstrated genuine interest and affection. Moving forward, my parents' access to my children would be more structured and limited, with clear expectations about reliability and engagement. This wasn't a punishment, but a necessary protection of my children's emotional well-being. If they demonstrated consistent, equitable treatment over time, the restrictions could be reevaluated. As I worked on refining these points, my phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "Found the cutest matching Hawaiian shirts for Max, Ava, and Lily. Thought maybe we could get similar ones for Emma and Jackson as souvenirs. Let me know their sizes if you think they'd like them." The text perfectly encapsulated my mother's approach. The surface appearance of thoughtfulness while completely missing the fundamental issue. After excluding my children from a significant family experience, she thought matching shirts would make everything right. It was exactly the type of gesture I had accepted in the past, convincing myself it represented genuine effort rather than superficial compensation. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I saved my draft document and shifted focus to my work. Obligations. I had a client deadline for a logo design, and maintaining professional commitments would be crucial in the days ahead. Work had always been my anchor during personal turbulence, the place where my competence was never questioned, my value never diminished by comparison to others. As I worked on finalizing the design concepts, I found myself reflecting on how my professional confidence contrasted with the lingering insecurity I felt in my role as daughter. Despite building a successful business, creating a loving home for my children, and navigating a divorce with maturity and grace, part of me still craved my parents' approval, still measured my worth through their eyes. That recognition helped solidify my resolve. If I, as an adult with decades of life experience and accomplishment, still carried the wounds of their conditional regard, how much greater was the risk to my children, whose sense of self was still forming? The boundaries I was establishing weren't just about this vacation or even the pattern of favoritism. They were about breaking a generational cycle of seeking validation from people unable or unwilling to provide it. By mid-afternoon, I had completed my work tasks and turned my attention to practical preparations for the evening's conversation with Emma and Jackson. I stopped at the grocery store for ingredients for their favorite meal, picked up ice cream for dessert, and even found a new board game we could play afterward. small touches to ensure the evening felt supportive rather than ominous. When I collected them from school, both children were in good spirits. Emma had received praise for her creative writing assignment, and Jackson had been selected to care for the class hamster over the upcoming weekend. Their everyday triumphs reminded me of what truly mattered, not grand vacations or expensive gifts, but the consistent acknowledgement of their efforts, interests, and unique qualities. At home, I involved them in dinner preparations. Jackson, carefully measuring pasta into the pot of boiling water while Emma helped grate cheese for the topping. Their easy chatter about school friends and playground politics filled the kitchen, creating a bubble of normalcy that I was determined to preserve despite the challenging conversation ahead. Daniel arrived at 6, bringing a salad from the organic market and fresh bread from the local bakery. He greeted the children with his usual enthusiasm, listening attentively to their detailed accounts of the day while helping set the table. Watching their interaction, I felt a surge of gratitude for his unwavering presence in their lives, his ability to make each of them feel valued and heard. During dinner, we kept the conversation light, saving the more serious discussion for afterward. When the meal was finished and the kitchen tidied, we gathered in the living room, Emma and Jackson, instinctively sensing the shift in atmosphere. "So, what did you want to talk to us about?" Emma asked, settling cross-legged on the couch beside me. Daniel and I exchanged a glance, and I began with the framework Dr. Martinez had helped me develop earlier. "You know how we've talked before about different types of families and how sometimes families change how they spend time together?" Both children nodded, familiar with these concepts from our open discussions about our own family restructuring after the divorce. "Well, Dad and I have been thinking about our time with Grandma and Grandpa Carter, and we've noticed that those visits sometimes leave you feeling disappointed. Like when they promised to come to my science fair but didn't," Jackson offered, demonstrating that he had indeed registered these letdowns. "Yes, exactly like that," Daniel confirmed gently. "Or when they had to leave early from Emma's birthday because they had plans with your cousins." Emma's face clouded slightly. "They always have time for Max and Ava and Lily." The simple observation, spoken without anger but with clear awareness, confirmed what Dr. Martinez had suggested. My children had already recognized the disparity in treatment, even if they hadn't fully processed its implications. "You're right," I acknowledged, not wanting to dismiss their perceptions. "And that's not fair to you. It's not because of anything you've done wrong. You are both amazing, wonderful children who deserve to spend time with people who are excited to be with you, who show up consistently, and who make you feel special." "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" Jackson asked, his forehead creasing. "With worry?" "No, buddy, not at all," Daniel assured him quickly. "This isn't about you doing anything wrong. Sometimes adults make choices that aren't fair, even when they're family. Like how they took Max and Ava and Lily to Hawaii but said we couldn't go?" Emma asked, making the connection immediately. I took a deep breath. Yes, that's one example. And Dad and I think that wasn't a fair decision. So we're going to make some changes to how we spend time with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. Over the next several minutes, we outlined in simple terms what those changes would look like. Fewer impromptu visits, more structured interaction, clearer expectations about following through on commitments. We emphasized all the people who consistently showed their love. Daniel's parents, who video called weekly from Arizona, my best friend Lauren, who never missed a school event, Daniel's sister Beth, who took them for special outings regularly. "So we're not going to see Grandma and Grandpa anymore?" Jackson asked, his voice small. "You'll still see them," I clarified. "Just maybe not as often, and we'll make sure those visits are positive experiences for everyone." "What if they get sad?" Emma wondered, her natural empathy extending even to those who had hurt her. Daniel fielded this question with the gentle honesty that made him such an effective parent. "They might feel sad about seeing you less, and that's okay. Adults can handle those feelings. Your job isn't to make sure they're happy. Your job is just to be kids who know they're loved exactly as they are." By the end of our conversation, both children seemed to understand the essence of what was changing, if not all the adult complexities behind it. We transitioned to playing the new board game I'd purchased, their initial solemnity giving way to laughter and playful competition as the evening progressed. After they went to bed, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table, debriefing on how the conversation had gone. "They already knew," Daniel said quietly. "They've been registering the inequity all along." "I know. I feel terrible for not addressing it sooner." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "Hey, you were trying to preserve their relationship with their grandparents. That came from a good place. But this is the right move now, Allie. You're protecting them from something that could do real damage to their self-worth." As Daniel gathered his things to leave, he paused at the door. "What are you going to say to your parents?" "I'm still working on that. They won't be back for another 5 days. I'll have something prepared by then." He nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'm behind you 100%. Those are great kids, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve unlimited access to them, even if they are family." After he left, I returned to my laptop and opened the document where I'd begun drafting. My message to my parents. With renewed clarity and purpose, I continued refining the points I wanted to make, preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of my adult life. But as challenging as that conversation would be, I finally understood that it was necessary, not just for my children's well-being, but for my own. In protecting Emma and Jackson from the subtle harm of conditional love, I was also, at long last, protecting the wounded child within myself who had spent a lifetime seeking approval that was always just out of reach. The days following my conversation with Emma and Jackson unfolded with a strange sense of calm. Having made the decision to establish boundaries with my parents, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. Thursday morning brought another text from my mother. This time, a photo of my father, with Scott's children on a catamaran tour, everyone smiling widely at the camera. Kids having the time of their lives. Max was a little scared at first, but is doing great now. The casual cruelty of sending these images while knowing my children had been explicitly excluded was either profoundly oblivious or deliberately hurtful. Neither interpretation improved my opinion of my mother's actions. I didn't respond to this message either, adding it instead to my growing documentation of the Hawaii trip. At work, I channeled my emotional energy into creativity, presenting 3 logo concepts to a new client who responded enthusiastically to my designs. "You've captured exactly what we were looking for," the boutique owner gushed during our virtual meeting. "How did you understand our vision so perfectly?" The irony wasn't lost on me. My professional success was built on the ability to truly see others, to identify and meet their needs with precision and care. In my work, I excelled at the very attentiveness my parents had never shown me or my children. That evening, after Emma and Jackson were in bed, I called my closest friend, Lauren Thompson. Lauren and I had met in college, bonding over shared classes. In our graphic design program and weathering the subsequent decades of career highs and lows, marriages, children, and in both our cases, divorces. She knew my family dynamics intimately, having witnessed them firsthand over the years. "It's about damn time," was her immediate response when I explained my decision to limit my parents' access to Emma and Jackson. "I've been biting my tongue for years watching how they treat your kids compared to Scott's." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, curious rather than accusatory. "Would you have been ready to hear it?" Lauren countered gently. "You've spent so long making excuses for them, Allie. You need to come to this realization yourself." She was right, of course. External observations, no matter how accurate, rarely catalyze significant change until the individual is ready to see the truth for themselves. I had needed to reach my own breaking point. "So, what's your strategy for when they get back?" Lauren asked, shifting to practical matters. I'm still working on that. I know I need to communicate the new boundaries clearly, but I'm struggling with the format. Phone call, email, in-person conversation. Each option has pros and cons. What does your gut tell you? I considered this. That an in-person conversation gives them too much opportunity to dismiss my concerns or twist the narrative. A phone call might be too easy to cut short when things get uncomfortable. An email feels impersonal, but gives me the chance to express everything without interruption or distraction. Could you do a combination? Email first to lay everything out, then follow up with a conversation once they've had time to digest your initial message? The suggestion resonated. That's actually perfect. It gives me control over the initial framing while still allowing for dialogue. Just prepare yourself for their response, Lauren warned. Based on past patterns, they're likely to minimize, deflect, or turn this around so they're the victims. You need to be ready for that. Again, she was right. My parents' typical reaction to any criticism involved some combination of denial. That never happened. Justification, we had good reasons, and counter-accusation, you're being too sensitive, demanding, unreasonable. Anticipating these responses would be crucial to maintaining my resolve. How can I help? Lauren asked, her loyalty one of the constants in my life. Do you want me to take the kids for an afternoon when you have this conversation? Or be on standby for moral support? Afterward? Both, if you're offering, I said gratefully. And maybe help me build up that village we're always talking about. People who consistently show up for Emma and Jackson, who make them feel valued and important. Consider it done. I'll reach out to Beth about coordinating some special outings for the kids in the coming weeks. And you know my door is always open, anytime you need a place to decompress after dealing with your family. Beth was Daniel's sister, another steadfast presence in our children's lives. Despite the divorce, she had maintained a close relationship with all of us, regularly driving the hour from her home to spend time with Emma and Jackson. She attended their school events, remembered their preferences and interests, and demonstrated, in countless ways, the attentive love my parents had never provided. Thanks, Lauren. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably something less wise and more impulsive, she teased. Seriously, though, I'm proud of you for doing this. It's not easy to set boundaries with family, especially when you've spent a lifetime trying to earn their approval. After our call, I returned to my laptop and opened the email draft I'd been working on. With Lauren's feedback in mind, I refined the message, focusing on clarity, specificity, and calm assertion of what would change going forward. I began with a straightforward acknowledgement of the Hawaii trip as the catalyst for my decision, avoiding accusatory language while still clearly naming the exclusion of my children as hurtful and unjustifiable. I outlined the pattern of favoritism I had documented, providing specific examples without emotion-laden commentary. I then detailed the new boundaries. No more unscheduled visits or last-minute invitations. All interactions would need to be arranged, at least a week in advance. Any commitments made to Emma and Jackson must be honored barring genuine emergencies. Cancellations to accommodate Scott's family would not be accepted. No more comparative comments about the children or their achievements, either explicit or implied. Gift-giving would need to demonstrate parity in thoughtfulness and value, not necessarily identical items but equivalent consideration. Communication about these issues would occur directly between adults, never with Emma and Jackson present or involved. I concluded by stating that these boundaries weren't punitive, but protective, designed to shield my children from the harmful effects of persistent preferential treatment. I expressed hope that, with time and demonstrated change, our relationship could evolve into something healthier and more equitable. After reading and revising the email several times, I saved it as a draft rather than sending it immediately. My parents wouldn't return from Hawaii for another 4 days, and I wanted to approach this conversation with deliberate timing. Friday morning, I woke to a text from Scott. Parents asked me to check if you're still not responding to Mom's messages. They're worried something might be wrong. The text irritated me on multiple levels, my parents using Scott as an intermediary rather than contacting me directly, the implication that the only explanation for my silence would be some emergency rather than deliberate choice, the continued obliviousness to how their actions might have affected me. I typed a brief reply. Nothing's wrong. I'm just busy with work and the kids. We'll connect with them when they're back. Scott responded immediately. Okay, just checking. They're bringing back some cool souvenirs for Emma and Jackson. Again, the assumption that trinkets would compensate for exclusion from a significant family experience. I didn't bother responding to this message. Instead, I focused on finalizing weekend plans for the children. Daniel would take them Saturday morning through Sunday evening, as per our usual schedule, and had arranged a visit to a new interactive science museum that Jackson had been eager to explore. I would use the time alone to further prepare for the upcoming conversation with my parents, including consulting with one more person whose perspective I valued. Saturday morning, after the kids left with Daniel, I drove across town to visit my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Walsh. At 83, Grandma Ellie remained sharp-minded and insightful, living independently in a senior community where she served as the unofficial social director, organizing everything from book clubs to charity drives. Her small apartment was filled with photographs of all her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, displayed with the egalitarian love that had always characterized her approach to family. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise," she greeted me at her door, ushering me into her cozy living room where coffee and fresh-baked muffins awaited. Though I suspect this isn't just a social call. My grandmother had always possessed an almost uncanny ability to read situations and emotions, a talent that had made her both an exceptional elementary school teacher during her working years and a trusted confidant to multiple generations of family members. "You're right," I admitted, accepting the coffee she offered. "I wanted to talk to you about Mom and Dad and the situation with my kids versus Scott's." Grandma Ellie settled into her favorite armchair and regarded me steadily. "I've been wondering when we'd have this conversation. The Hawaii trip was the last straw, I imagine?" "You knew about that?" I asked, surprised. "Catherine called to tell me about their plans months ago. I asked them if Emma and Jackson were going, and she gave me some nonsense about them being too young to appreciate it. I pointed out that Lily is younger than Jackson, but she had an excuse ready for that too." She shook her head disapprovingly. "I told her she was making a mistake, but you know your mother. Once she decides something, it takes an act of God to change her mind." The revelation that my grandmother had advocated for my children touched me deeply. "Why didn't you tell?" "Me? Would it have helped Allison? Or would it just have created tension before the trip even happened? I figured you'd see the truth soon enough, and then you'd be ready to address it." Again, someone who cared about me had recognized I needed to reach my own conclusions rather than being pushed toward them. I wondered briefly if my own daughter would someday view me with the same careful understanding of my blind spots and growth processes. "I'm setting boundaries with them when they get back," I explained, outlining the email I had drafted and the limits I planned to establish. Grandma Ellie listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "I think you're doing the right thing, though it won't be easy. Catherine has always played favorites, even as a child. She did it with her dolls, her friends, and later with boyfriends. Everything was ranked and categorized in her mind, some things inherently more valuable than others. Richard is similar, though less obvious about it. This insight into my mother's long-standing personality trait helped contextualize her behavior, though it didn't excuse it. The question is," my grandmother continued, "are you prepared for their reaction? Because they won't accept this gracefully. Allison, they'll deny, they'll deflect, they'll try to make you feel guilty for overreacting. They'll enlist Scott to plead their case. They may even try to go around you to maintain access to the children." Her frankness was exactly what I needed. Not sugar-coated reassurance, but realistic preparation for the challenges ahead. That's partly why I'm here. I want to make sure I'm ready for whatever they throw at me. Well, you should know that your mother has already called me complaining about you not responding to her messages from Hawaii. She suggested you might be jealous of Scott's family getting this opportunity. I nearly choked on my coffee. Jealous? I'm an adult. I don't care about missing a vacation. I care about my children being deliberately excluded while their cousins are included. I know that, Grandma Ellie assured me. And I told her as much. But she's already constructing a narrative where you're the problem, not her actions. And, Dad? Richard will follow Catherine's lead as he always does. He might feel some genuine remorse, but he won't go against her, especially not publicly. This assessment aligned with my own understanding of my parents' dynamic. My father rarely took independent positions on family matters, generally deferring to my mother's stronger personality and preferences. So what's your advice? I asked, valuing the perspective of someone who had known my parents far longer than I had. Be absolutely clear about your boundaries and the consequences for violating them. Don't leave room for misinterpretation or negotiation on the fundamental points. Document everything in writing, and most importantly, be prepared to follow through. She leaned forward, emphasizing her next words. If you say they can't see the children unless they honor specific conditions, you must be willing to enforce that, even when it's inconvenient or emotionally difficult. I am, I said with conviction. Emma and Jackson's well-being matters more than anyone's comfort, including mine. Grandma Ellie smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. I know this isn't easy, Allison. Recognizing that your parents aren't capable of providing what your children need, what you need, is painful. But it's also liberating. You're breaking a cycle that could have continued for generations. Will you support this decision when Mom inevitably complains to you about it? I asked, realizing the position this might put her in. Absolutely. I love my daughter, but I don't approve of how she's treated you or your children. I'll tell her the truth, that she's created this situation through her own persistent favoritism, and that rebuilding trust will require genuine change, not just promises or temporary adjustments. The unequivocal support brought tears to my eyes. Thank you. That means more than I can say. We spent the next hour discussing practical strategies for the upcoming conversation, Grandma Ellie offering insights from decades of managing difficult family dynamics. By the time I left, equipped with both tactical advice and fresh muffins for the children, I felt more confident in my approach and more certain of its necessity. Sunday was devoted to finalizing preparations. I reviewed and refined my email one last time, scheduled it to be sent Tuesday morning when my parents would be back from Hawaii, but before they would have time to drop by unannounced. I prepared a script for the follow-up phone conversation I anticipated would occur shortly after they received the email, identifying potential arguments they might make and my planned responses. I also took practical steps to ensure they couldn't circumvent my boundaries. I changed the garage door code they had previously known. I informed the children's school that my parents were not authorized to pick them up without explicit permission from Daniel or me. I even contacted their extracurricular activity leaders to ensure similar protections were in place. These measures might seem extreme to someone who hadn't witnessed my parents' tendency to ignore limits they found inconvenient, but I knew they were necessary precautions. My mother, in particular, had demonstrated on multiple occasions her willingness to disregard stated preferences if they conflicted with her own agenda. When Daniel brought the children home Sunday evening, both were bubbling with excitement about their museum adventure, Jackson particularly enthralled with the robotics exhibit they had explored. Dad says Aunt Beth wants to take us camping next weekend, Emma informed me as she unpacked her overnight bag. Can we go? If you'd like to, that sounds wonderful, I replied, making a mental note to thank Beth for her timely invitation. camping trip would provide a perfect opportunity for the children to be away during what might be a contentious period immediately following my conversation with my parents. After the children were in bed, Daniel lingered in the kitchen, helping me prepare lunches for the next day. "Everything set for Tuesday?" he asked, efficiently assembling sandwiches with the practiced ease of a parent. "As much as it can be," I confirmed. "Email drafted, follow-up conversation planned, practical safeguards in place. And emotionally, how are you holding up?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the tactical aspects of the situation that I hadn't fully processed my own feelings about what amounted to a fundamental restructuring of my relationship with my parents. "I'm okay," I said slowly, considering my emotional state. "Sad that it's come to this. Angry that they've put me in this position, but mostly just resolved to do what's necessary, no matter how difficult." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing takes real courage. Standing up to family is harder than facing any external adversary." I just keep thinking about what Dr. Martinez said, about how children develop their sense of self-worth from how they're valued by the adults in their lives. I can't let Emma and Jackson internalize the message that they're somehow less deserving of love and attention than their cousins. "You're making the right call," Daniel assured me, closing the last lunchbox. "And I'm here if you need backup, logistical or emotional." As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, when we were married, I sometimes felt like you were still that little girl desperately seeking your parents' approval. Seeing you take this stand, prioritizing our kids' well-being over that lifelong desire for validation, it's impressive, Allie. You should be proud of yourself." His observation surprised me, both in its insight and its accuracy. Despite our divorce, or perhaps because of it, Daniel sometimes saw aspects of my personality and behavior that I hadn't fully recognized myself. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, reflecting on his words. He was right. Much of my life had been structured around seeking my parents' approval, making choices I thought would please them, excusing behavior that should never have been accepted. Even after establishing my own family, I had continued to orbit around their validation, allowing their preferences to influence decisions that should have been based solely on what was best for my children and myself. The Hawaii trip had finally broken that pattern, forcing me to confront the reality that no amount of accommodation or understanding on my part would ever be sufficient to secure the unconditional love and support I had spent a lifetime seeking. In setting boundaries to protect Emma and Jackson, I was also, finally, protecting myself from the perpetual disappointment of that fruitless quest. Monday passed in a blur of normal activities: work deadlines, school routines, evening homework. I maintained a calm exterior for the children's benefit, but inwardly, I was bracing for the confrontation to come. My parents would return from Hawaii late Monday night, likely exhausted from travel, but filled with stories and souvenirs to share with Scott's family. My email would arrive in their inbox Tuesday morning, disrupting whatever narrative they had constructed about the successful family vacation and their relationship with their grandchildren. As I went to bed Monday night, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The decision had been made, the plan set in motion. Whatever happened next would be challenging, possibly painful, but necessary for the health and well-being of the family I was responsible for protecting. The stage was set for a long overdue reckoning, one that would reshape family relationships for years to come. Tuesday morning arrived with a certain gravity, the weight of the impending confrontation hanging in the air as I prepared breakfast for Emma and Jackson. Though I maintained an outwardly normal demeanor, inwardly I was acutely aware that my scheduled email would be delivered to my parents' inbox at 9 a.m., precisely when I estimated they would be settling in with their morning coffee after returning from Hawaii. After dropping the children at school, I returned home to my home office rather than the coffee shop where I sometimes worked. I wanted privacy for whatever fallout might come from my message. At 9:01 a.m., my laptop pinged with the delivery confirmation. The email was sent, the boundaries articulated, the process of recalibration officially begun. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my office, acknowledging the significance of this step. There would be no going back to the previous dynamic. Either the relationship with my parents would evolve into something healthier, or it would diminish to a minimal, carefully managed connection. Knowing my parents wouldn't respond immediately, they preferred to regroup and formulate a united front before addressing conflict. I turned my attention to gathering and organizing additional information that might prove necessary in the conversations ahead. My initial documentation had focused on specific incidents demonstrating the pattern of favoritism. Now I needed to look deeper, examining financial discrepancies, broken promises, and the subtle messaging that had been directed at my children over the years. I created 3 separate files on my computer: financial inequities, documenting the disparity in gifts, experiences, and financial support between my children and Scott's. Reliability. Record. Tracking the pattern of commitments kept versus broken, particularly where conflicting obligations to Scott's family were concerned. Communication. Analysis. Noting the subtle and not-so-subtle messages conveyed to my children about their place in the family hierarchy. Starting with the financial file, I began by listing holiday and birthday gifts for the past 5 years, using credit card statements, thank you notes the children had written, and photographs from celebration events to ensure accuracy. The pattern that emerged was stark. For Christmas 2022, Max, age 12, gaming laptop, $800, Ava, age 10, designer winter coat and accessories, $350, Lily, age 5, deluxe dollhouse with furniture sets, $275, Emma, age 8, craft kit, $40, Jackson, age 6, dinosaur book, $25. For Christmas 2021, Max, age 11, hoverboard, $275, Ava, age 9, tablet, $220, Lily, age 4, interactive learning toy, $150, Emma, age 7, board game, $30, Jackson, age 5, action figures, $35. The pattern continued through previous years and extended to birthdays, Easter baskets, just because gifts, and special occasion presents. While my parents occasionally gave my children more substantial gifts, particularly if I specifically suggested something, the overall trend showed a significant financial disparity favoring Scott's children. Beyond physical gifts, there were experiential inequities as well. My parents had funded summer camps for Scott's children for 3 years running, $2,500 per child per summer, while offering no similar support for Emma and Jackson. They had taken Max, Ava, and Lily on weekend trips to theme parks, museums, and sporting events numerous times, while Emma and Jackson had been included in only 2 such excursions over the same period. Moving to the reliability file, I documented each commitment made to my children over the past 2 years and whether it had been honored or broken. The results were equally telling. Promised attendance at Emma's piano recital. Canceled day before because Ava had a soccer tournament they wanted to attend. Committed to Jackson's science fair. Arrived 45 minutes late. Stayed only 10 minutes. Scheduled. Weekend visit with both children. Cut short by 24 hours when opportunity arose to take Max to a baseball game. Promised movie afternoon with Emma. Canceled morning of because Lily was having a bad day and needed attention. Birthday dinner for Jackson. Arrived late, left early for unspecified other plans. Out of 17 specific commitments made to my children, 11 had been broken, abbreviated, or significantly altered. By comparison, I could identify only 2 occasions when plans with Scott's children had been similarly disrupted. The communication file was more subjective but equally important. I noted comments, both direct and overheard, that conveyed messages about my children's place in the family. Emma is so sensitive, not like Ava. Ava just goes with the flow. Comparing the children, framing Emma's emotions as problematic. Jackson. Has so much energy. Max was never this difficult at his age. Labeling my son's normal childhood exuberance as a deficiency. We got tickets to the water park, but I don't think Emma would enjoy it. She didn't seem to like the pool last summer. Excluding based on a single past experience, never extended to Scott's children. It's just easier with Scott's kids. They don't require as much attention. Direct statement of preference, ignoring that Lily was younger than Jackson. I also noted patterns in how my parents talked about the children to others. Scott's children were consistently described in terms of their achievements, talents, and positive qualities. My children, when mentioned at all, were typically characterized by challenges or perceived deficiencies. Emma's shyness, Jackson's energy level, their supposed pickiness about food or activities. As I assembled this information, I was struck by how systematic the favoritism had been. Not merely occasional slights, but a consistent pattern across every dimension of the grandparent-grandchild relationship. The Hawaii trip wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical extension of an established family dynamic. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from my brother. "Mom and Dad are upset about some email you sent. What's going on? They're calling me nonstop." The message didn't surprise me. I had anticipated that my parents would immediately contact Scott, seeking his intervention or at least his allegiance in what they would perceive as an unprovoked attack. I replied with deliberate brevity. "This is between me and our parents. It's about how they treat my children compared to yours. I'd prefer to handle it directly with them." Scott's response came quickly. "They say you're overreacting to the Hawaii thing. Mom's really hurt that you'd accuse them of not loving Emma and Jackson." The predictable deflection and emotional manipulation were already beginning. My mother had reframed my specific concerns about patterns of behavior as an accusation about feelings, shifting the conversation from provable actions to the unprovable realm of emotions. "I haven't accused them of not loving my kids," I texted back. "I've pointed out a pattern of treating them differently than yours. Those are observable facts, not interpretations of feelings." "Can't we all just talk about this?" Scott pleaded. "They're really upset. Dad's talking about canceling their anniversary trip to deal with this family crisis." Another predictable tactic, creating secondary emotional crises to distract from the original issue. I had seen this approach throughout my childhood, my mother in particular redirecting uncomfortable conversations by becoming distraught, leading everyone to focus on comforting her rather than addressing the original concern. I've suggested, "We talk after they've had time to consider what I've written," I replied. "And this isn't a family crisis requiring canceled trips. It's a straightforward request for more equitable treatment of all their grandchildren. But the way you've done this, with a formal email and all these boundaries, it feels extreme. Couldn't you have just mentioned you were upset about Hawaii?" I took a deep breath before responding, reminding myself that Scott likely had no idea of the full extent of the favoritism. From his perspective, the disparity in treatment probably seemed mild, perhaps even justified by factors he perceived as relevant, his children's ages, personalities, or interests. "Scott, I've tried the gentle approach for years. It hasn't worked. And this isn't just about Hawaii. It's about a consistent pattern that's been harmful to my children. I'm not asking for special treatment, just equality." "Well, they want to come over tonight to talk to you in person. They say email is too impersonal for family matters." Here was the first attempt to circumvent my clearly stated boundaries. I had specifically requested time for reflection before a conversation and had indicated my preference for an initial phone call rather than an in-person meeting. My parents were already demonstrating their unwillingness to respect my stated needs in the situation. "No, that won't work," I replied firmly. "As I said in my email, I'd like them to take time to consider what I've written. I'm open to a phone conversation tomorrow, followed by an in-person meeting later if necessary." "They're not going to like that," Scott warned. "I understand, but these are my boundaries. and I need them to be respected." Scott didn't respond further, likely reporting my refusal back to my parents. I expected they would try other avenues of contact, direct calls, texts, perhaps even an unannounced visit despite my explicit request to the contrary. Sure enough, by 2:00 p.m., I had received 5 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, and a series of increasingly urgent text messages. "We need to discuss this immediately." "This is ridiculous, Allison. We just got back from a long trip, and now this? Your father is very upset. His blood pressure is concerning me. Please call us right away. This is a family matter that should be discussed, not dictated via email." Each message attempted to create urgency, place responsibility for their emotional distress on me, or invalidate my chosen approach to the conversation. Each represented exactly the kind of manipulation I had experienced throughout my life: the implied guilt, the subtle blame, the redirection of focus from their actions to my response. I didn't reply to any of these messages, sticking firmly to the timeline and process I had outlined in my email. They needed to understand that the old dynamics, where their distress automatically overrode any boundaries I attempted to establish, no longer applied. At 3:30 p.m., I received a call from Melody, Scott's wife. I hesitated before answering, unsure of her role in this unfolding drama, but eventually decided direct communication was preferable to speculation. "Allison, I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice carefully modulated to convey concern, without confrontation. "Scott mentioned you're having some issues with your parents about how they treat the kids." "That's correct," I replied neutrally. "I just wanted you to know that we had no idea you felt this way about the Hawaii trip. If we'd known you were upset about Emma and Jackson being excluded, we would never have gone along with it." The claim seemed disingenuous given the circumstances. "Melody, did it never strike you as odd that my children were explicitly uninvited while yours were welcomed? That Lily, who's younger than Jackson, was included while he was deemed too young?" A pause. "Well, Catherine said you had agreed it was better for them to wait until they were older." "And that didn't seem suspicious to you? That I would supposedly agree my 8-year-old daughter wasn't ready for a trip that your 5-year-old daughter was perfectly suited for?" Another longer pause. "I guess I didn't question it too deeply. Catherine and Richard have always been so generous with our kids. It didn't occur to me that they might be playing favorites," I supplied when she trailed off. "That sounds so harsh," Melody protested. "I'm sure they love all their grandchildren." "Love isn't the issue, Melody. Actions are, and their actions consistently demonstrate preferential treatment of your children over mine. Scott says you've made a whole list of complaints going back years. Don't you think that's a bit excessive? Keeping score like that?" The characterization of my documentation as keeping score was revealing, framing my legitimate concerns as petty grievances rather than evidence of a harmful pattern. "It's not about scorekeeping," I explained calmly. "It's about recognizing a consistent pattern that's damaging to my children. When Emma asks why Grandma and Grandpa attend every one of Ava's dance recitals but have only been to one of her piano performances, that's not me keeping score. That's my daughter noticing she's being treated differently." "Kids notice different things," Melody said dismissively. "Max sometimes asks why Daniel's parents send bigger birthday presents than Catherine and Richard. It doesn't mean anyone's playing favorites." The comparison was so ludicrous I almost laughed. "Melody Daniel's parents live on a fixed income in Arizona and rarely see the children in person. My parents live 30 minutes away, are financially comfortable, and see your children weekly. The situations aren't remotely comparable." "Well, I just think family problems should stay within the family," she said, her tone cooling. "Sending formal emails with boundaries and conditions seems extreme." "I appreciate your perspective," I replied, not bothering to point out the irony of her statement given that she was involving herself in the very issue she claimed should stay within the family. "But I need to do what's best for Emma and Jackson." After ending the call, I wasn't surprised to find another flurry of text messages from my mother, her tone now shifting from urgency to wounded indignation. "After everything we've done for you and your children, this is how you repay us? We had no idea you felt this way. Why haven't you said something before? Your father is deeply hurt. Is this how you want things to be? Your children will suffer without their grandparents." Each message reinforced my decision to establish clear boundaries. The immediate leap to victimhood, the denial of obvious patterns, the emotional leverage of threatening reduced contact, the very thing I was actually requesting, all demonstrated the manipulative dynamics I was determined to change. By late afternoon, a new tactic emerged. My phone buzzed with a notification from my email, a lengthy message from my father, bypassing my request for reflection time with a point-by-point rebuttal of my concerns. The email opened with expressions of shock and deep hurt at my accusations, followed by alternative explanations for each example I had provided. The Christmas gifts appeared uneven because we contributed to college funds for Emma and Jackson that you don't see. We miss events for your children when unavoidable. Conflicts arise, not out of preference for Scott's activities. The Hawaii trip invitation was based solely on practical considerations of age appropriateness, not favoritism. Each justification contained just enough plausibility to create doubt, yet fell apart under scrutiny. The supposed college fund contributions had never been mentioned before this moment. The unavoidable conflicts consistently prioritized Scott's family's events. The age appropriateness argument collapsed entirely given Lily's inclusion despite being younger than Jackson. The email concluded with a not-so-subtle threat. "If you persist in these hurtful accusations, you will damage not only our relationship with you, but potentially deprive your children of grandparents who love them dearly." I closed the email without responding, adding it to my growing documentation of their reaction to boundary setting. The pattern was clear: denial, justification, counter-accusation, and finally, attempts at emotional leverage. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, I received a text from Daniel. "Your mom just called me. Wanted to know if I support this attack on them." I told her this wasn't about taking sides, but about what's best for the kids. The attempt to triangulate by contacting my ex-husband didn't surprise me. My mother had often sought allies in family conflicts, approaching anyone she thought might influence the situation in her favor. "Thanks for the heads up," I replied, "and for keeping the focus on the kids." "Always," Daniel texted back. She tried the whole, "don't you think Allie is being unreasonable" approach. I shut that down pretty quick. The support meant more than I could express in a text message. Having Daniel reinforce the boundaries I was establishing provided additional protection for Emma and Jackson during this turbulent period. By evening, a new strategy had emerged from my parents. My mother left a voicemail with a markedly different tone, conciliatory, almost pleading. "Allison, honey, we've clearly had a misunderstanding. We never meant to make you or the children feel less important. We love all our grandchildren equally. Maybe we've made some mistakes in how we've shown that, but it was never intentional. Please call us so we can fix this. Family is too important for these kinds of divisions." The sudden shift to reconciliation without accountability was another familiar tactic. When denial and aggression failed to achieve the desired result, my mother typically pivoted to apparent contrition, offering vague acknowledgments of possible mistakes, without specific recognition of the harmful behavior or concrete commitments to change. This cycle of responses, denial, anger, blame, and finally insincere conciliation, had played out countless times throughout my life. The predictability of it strengthened my resolve to maintain the boundaries I had established. Real change would require genuine recognition of the pattern, not just tactical adjustments designed to restore the status quo with minimal inconvenience to my parents. As I prepared dinner for Emma and Jackson, I felt strangely calm despite the barrage of manipulation attempts I'd weathered throughout the day. Each predictable response from my parents and their recruited allies confirmed the necessity of the boundaries I was establishing. The emotional hooks that had typically drawn me back into unhealthy dynamics seemed less powerful now, disarmed by my clear-eyed recognition of the patterns at play. When the children arrived home from their after-school activities, they brought a normalcy that grounded me firmly in the present. Emma's excited chatter about her art class project, Jackson's detailed account of the playground game he had invented. These were the voices that mattered, the relationships I was committed to protecting. As they settled into homework at the kitchen table, I glanced at my phone to find one final text message from my mother. "We'll come by tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss this in person. This needs to be resolved immediately." The direct disregard for my clearly stated boundaries was the final confirmation that my decision had been correct. Without hesitation, I texted back, "That won't work for me. As I stated in my email, I'm open to a phone conversation tomorrow, followed by an in-person meeting later if necessary. Please respect the process I've outlined." Then I set my phone aside and turned my full attention to my children, helping with spelling words and math problems, listening to their stories and concerns, demonstrating through my consistent presence and engagement the unconditional love they deserved, the very thing my parents had failed to provide. Wednesday morning arrived with an unexpected silence. After the barrage of calls, texts, and emails the previous day, the absence of communication from my parents was noticeable. I wondered if they were regrouping, consulting with Scott, or perhaps finally taking the time for reflection I had requested. Whatever the reason, the quiet provided a welcome opportunity to seek additional professional guidance before the inevitable confrontation resumed. After dropping the children at school, I made 3 important calls. The first was to Dr. Elena Martinez, requesting an emergency session to discuss strategies for managing the escalating family conflict. The second was to my attorney, Rebecca Winters, who had handled my divorce proceedings with Daniel. While this situation didn't necessarily have legal implications, Rebecca's expertise in family mediation might prove valuable if the conflict intensified. The third call was to my primary care physician, Dr. Samantha Patel, requesting a referral to a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and generational patterns. Dr. Martinez was able to fit me in for a video consultation at 11 a.m. Rebecca offered a phone conversation during her lunch break at 1 p.m. Dr. Patel's office promised to email therapist recommendations by the end of the day. With these resources lined up, I felt better equipped to handle whatever came next. At 9:45 a.m., just as I was settling into my home office to prepare for the call with Dr. Martinez, the doorbell rang. Despite my explicit request for a phone conversation rather than an in-person meeting, my parents had decided to show up unannounced. I observed them through the security camera I had installed after my divorce. My mother standing with arms crossed, my father shifting uncomfortably beside her, both dressed in the casual but coordinated vacation clothes they favored. The matching Hawaiian shirt seemed particularly ironic given the circumstances. Instead of answering the door, I sent a text message. "I see you've come to the house despite my request for a phone conversation. I'm not available for an in-person meeting today. Please respect the boundaries I've outlined and call me at 3 p.m. as suggested in my email." Through the camera, I watched my mother check her phone, frown deeply, and then show the screen to my father. Their body language shifted, her posture stiffening with indignation, his shoulders slumping slightly. My mother rang the doorbell, again, more insistently this time, while my father glanced uncomfortably at the security camera, seemingly aware they were being observed. After a moment of apparent deliberation, my mother stepped closer to the door. "Allison, we know you're in there. This is ridiculous. We're your parents. Open the door so we can talk about this like adults." I did not respond, maintaining the boundary I had established despite the discomfort of hearing my mother's voice escalate from pleading to demanding. After several more attempts, they finally retreated to their car. my mother gesturing emphatically as she spoke to my father, who simply nodded as he started the engine. The encounter left me shaken, but more convinced than ever that professional guidance was necessary. My parents' willingness to disregard my clearly stated boundaries, showing up unannounced after I had explicitly requested otherwise, demonstrated how deeply ingrained the dysfunctional patterns had become. At 11:02 a.m., I connected with Dr. Martinez for our video session. I recounted the events of the past few days, including my parents' recent appearance at my door. Their behavior confirms what we discussed earlier. They're accustomed to having their preferences supersede your boundaries, Dr. Martinez observed. What's different now is your response. You're no longer accommodating the dynamic, and that's causing significant disruption to the established pattern. I feel guilty about that disruption, I admitted. Not about setting the boundaries, but about changing the rules that have governed our relationship for decades. It feels like I'm pulling the rug out from under them without warning. Dr. Martinez considered this. That's a common reaction when we begin establishing healthy boundaries with family members. But consider this. Have they ever worried about disrupting your life? About changing plans that affected you or your children? About enforcing their preferences regardless of the impact on you? The questions helped recalibrate my perspective. My parents had routinely prioritized their preferences, Scott's family's activities, and their own comfort over commitments to me and my children. They had never expressed concern about the disruption caused by their last-minute cancellations or changed plans. What specific guidance do you have for the phone call this afternoon? I asked, moving toward the practical advice I needed. First, prepare yourself for more of the same tactics you've already witnessed: denial, blame, emotional manipulation. They'll likely cycle through these rapidly when they realize one approach isn't working, Dr. Martinez advised. Second, decide in advance what your non-negotiable points are versus where you might be flexible. And third, have a clear exit strategy for the conversation, a specific phrase or time limit that allows you to end the call if it becomes unproductive. We spent the remainder of the session role-playing potential scenarios with Dr. Martinez, adopting my mother's typical responses while I practiced maintaining calm, clear boundaries without becoming defensive or apologetic. By the end of our time, I felt more prepared for the conversation ahead, equipped with specific language and strategies to manage the likely emotional manipulation attempts. My call with Rebecca Winters at 1 p.m. provided additional practical guidance from a legal perspective. While this isn't inherently a legal matter, there are aspects you should consider, Rebecca advised after I'd outlined the situation. First, document everything: the pattern of favoritism, your requests for changed behavior, their responses. Should this escalate to restricted access to your children, having this documentation will be valuable. Do you think it could reach that point? I asked, concerned about the potential for true estrangement rather than mere boundary setting. Based on what you've described about their reaction so far, they seem more interested in maintaining control than in understanding your concerns, Rebecca replied frankly. People who prioritize control over connection often make choices that damage relationships permanently rather than adapting to new boundaries. She went on to recommend specific precautions, many of which I had already implemented, ensuring the school and extracurricular activities understood who was authorized to pick up the children, changing security codes and passwords, and being explicit with Emma and Jackson about expected contact with their grandparents. One other thing to consider, Rebecca added toward the end of our conversation. If they've been contributing financially to anything related to your children, school tuition, activities, medical expenses, have alternative arrangements in place. Financial leverage is often used to undermine boundaries. This was an aspect I hadn't fully considered. While my parents weren't regularly contributing to major expenses, they had occasionally paid for extracurricular activities or specialized camps. I made a mental note to review our finances and ensure we weren't vulnerable to this type of pressure. By 2:30 p.m., I had prepared thoroughly for the 3 p.m. call with my parents. I had notes outlining my key points, anticipated responses from them, and strategies for maintaining focus on the central issues. I had arranged for the children to have an extended playdate after school, ensuring I would have privacy for the conversation. I had even prepared a cup of chamomile tea and set it beside me on my desk, a small ritual of self-care amid the tension. At precisely 3 p.m., my phone rang. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and answered. "Hello, Mom. Dad. Thank you for calling at the arranged time." "Allison, this whole situation is completely unnecessary," my mother began immediately, bypassing any greeting. "We came by this morning to resolve this face-to-face, and you refused to even open the door to your own parents. As I explained in my email and subsequent text, I requested a phone conversation today, not an in-person meeting," I replied calmly. Coming to my house unannounced was disregarding the boundary I had set. Boundaries with family? Since when do parents and children need boundaries? My mother's voice carried the familiar tone of indignant disbelief that had often preceded dismissal of my concerns in the past. "Since the existing dynamic has proven harmful to my children," I stated simply. "That's what this is about. Protecting Emma and Jackson from the consistent pattern of differential treatment compared to Scott's children. We love all our grandchildren equally," my father interjected, speaking for the first time. His voice sounded tired, less combative than my mother's. "We would never intentionally hurt Emma or Jackson." Intent and impact are different things. "Dad," I explained, "you might not intend to hurt them, but when they see their cousins consistently receiving more attention, more generous gifts, and more reliable commitment from you, the impact is harmful regardless of your intention." "This is absurd," my mother cut in. "We don't treat the children differently. Every child is unique and has different needs and interests. We respond to those individual differences, not some arbitrary standard of equality where everyone gets exactly the same thing." This was a familiar deflection, reframing preferential treatment as individualized attention to justify the disparity. I had anticipated this argument and was prepared to address it directly. "I agree that each child is unique and has individual needs," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't explain why Max, Ava, and Lily consistently receive more expensive gifts, more of your time, and more reliable follow-through on commitments than Emma and Jackson. It doesn't explain why a 5-year-old Lily was deemed old enough for Hawaii when a 6-year-old Jackson was not." "The Hawaii trip had special circumstances," my father said, his tone placating. "Lily was only included because she's too young to be left behind, while Scott and Melody came to help with the older children. It wasn't about excluding Emma and Jackson." "That explanation might make sense if the trip had been limited to you, Scott's family, and no one else," I countered. "But Aunt Susan, Uncle Bill, Rachel, and her family were all included. This wasn't a small grandparent trip with logistical constraints. It was a full family vacation from which only my children were excluded." A brief silence followed before my mother shifted tactics. "Well, if you'd been more communicative about wanting the children to come, perhaps we could have made different arrangements. You didn't protest strongly enough when we explained our thinking." This attempt to shift responsibility onto me was another predictable move. I drew on the preparation with Dr. Martinez to respond without becoming defensive. "I expressed disappointment and questioned the decision when you first told me," I reminded them. "But more importantly, I shouldn't have to protest strongly enough for my children to be included in family events. They should be automatically considered, just as Scott's children are." "This is all coming out of nowhere," my father said, sounding genuinely bewildered. "If you've had these concerns for years, as your email suggests, why haven't you raised them before now?" It was a fair question, though one that ignored the many subtle ways I had attempted to address the imbalance over the years. I decided to answer honestly rather than defensively. "I have raised concerns in smaller ways many times, asking why. You canceled plans with Emma and Jackson, questioning gift disparities, pointing out missed milestones. Those concerns were always dismissed or explained away. I accepted those explanations because I wanted to believe they were valid. The Hawaii trip made it impossible to maintain that belief. So now you're punishing us with these boundaries and conditions for seeing our own grandchildren, my mother said, her voice hardening. Do you have any idea how hurtful that is to us? I had expected this framing. My protective measures characterized as punishment. The focus shifted to their hurt feelings rather than my children's experiences. Again, I was prepared. This isn't punishment, Mom. It's protection. Emma and Jackson deserve relationships with adults who consistently demonstrate they are valued and important. The patterns I've documented show they haven't been receiving that from you and Dad. The boundaries I've established are designed to ensure healthier interactions going forward. And if we don't agree to these arbitrary rules, what then? You'll keep our grandchildren from us entirely? The threat in my mother's question was clear. Agree to my terms or face consequences. I'm not threatening to cut off contact, I clarified. I'm establishing conditions under which contact will be healthy rather than harmful. If you're unwilling to acknowledge the pattern and work toward more equitable treatment, then yes, their contact with you will be more limited and more supervised. That's not a threat. It's a natural consequence of choices about how you engage with them. Another silence, longer this time. I could hear muffled conversation between my parents, suggesting they had muted their end of the call to confer privately. When they returned, my father spoke. Allison, we don't agree with your characterization of our relationship with the grandchildren, but we also don't want to lose connection with Emma and Jackson. What specifically would you need to see from us to resolve this situation? The question suggested at least some willingness to consider change, though the disclaimer at the beginning indicated continued resistance to acknowledging the fundamental issue. I decided to focus on the opening rather than the resistance. I need 3 things, I replied, referring to my prepared notes. First, recognition that a pattern of differential treatment has existed, whether intentional or not. Second, commitment to specific changes, including honoring scheduled time with Emma and Jackson, providing gifts of equivalent thoughtfulness and value to what Scott's children receive, and including them equally in family experiences. And third, respect for my role as their parent, including adherence to the boundaries I establish regarding their well-being. That sounds like a list of demands, not a path to reconciliation, my mother objected. It's a list of requirements for a healthy relationship going forward, I corrected gently. Reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm and commitment to change, not just a desire to return to the previous dynamic. My father sighed audibly. We need time to process this, Allison. You've laid out some serious accusations and expectations. This isn't something we can resolve in one phone call. I agree, I said, relieved that at least this point seemed to resonate. I never expected immediate resolution. Taking time for reflection was precisely what I suggested in my initial email. So, what happens now? My mother asked, her tone somewhere between defiant and defeated. I suggest we take a 3-week pause in direct contact, I proposed, following Dr. Martinez's recommendation for a defined cooling-off period. During that time, I ask that you respect my request for no unannounced visits and no attempts to contact Emma and Jackson directly. After 3 weeks, we can schedule another conversation to discuss next steps. 3 weeks without seeing or speaking to our grandchildren? My mother's voice rose in pitch. That's completely unreasonable. It's a temporary measure to allow everyone time to process and reflect, I explained. Emma and Jackson will be attending a weekend camping trip with Aunt Beth this weekend, and they have several other activities planned for the coming weeks. This pause doesn't need to be disruptive to them if we present it appropriately. After more discussion and several attempts by my mother to reduce the time frame, they reluctantly agreed to the 3-week pause. We scheduled a follow-up call for the last week of June, with the understanding that they would use the intervening time to consider the concerns I had raised and the changes I had requested. As we prepared to end the call, My father asked quietly, "Are you planning to discuss this with Scott?" The question revealed one of their primary concerns: how this conflict might affect their relationship with their favored child and his family. I chose my words carefully. "I've already had brief conversations with Scott, as you know. I've explained that this is between us and doesn't need to affect his family's relationship with you. How much detail I share with him depends partly on how this situation evolves." The implicit message was clear. Their handling of this conflict with me might determine whether it expanded to involve Scott more directly. While I had no intention of trying to damage their relationship with Scott's family, I also wouldn't shield them from the natural consequences of their choices if those choices escalated the situation. After ending the call, I sat quietly at my desk, processing the conversation. While they hadn't fully acknowledged the pattern or accepted responsibility, they had at least agreed to the reflective pause I had requested. It was a small step, but potentially significant if they used the time to genuinely consider their behavior rather than simply plotting to undermine my boundaries. I made detailed notes about the conversation while it was fresh in my mind, adding them to my documentation file. Then I sent a brief update to Dr. Martinez, summarizing the outcome and confirming our follow-up appointment the following week. Just as I was finishing, my email pinged with the promised therapist recommendations from Dr. Patel's office. 3 names were listed, each with specializations in family systems therapy and experience with issues of generational patterns and parental favoritism. I made a note to research them further and schedule an initial consultation with at least 1. The professional support I had enlisted, Dr. Martinez for immediate guidance, Rebecca for legal perspective, and potentially a new therapist for ongoing work, formed a crucial foundation for navigating this challenging territory. Their expertise provided validation for my concerns, strategies for managing the conflict, and reassurance that I was taking appropriate steps to protect my children. As I prepared to pick up Emma and Jackson from school, I reflected on how differently I felt compared to just a week ago. Though the situation remained difficult and the outcome uncertain, I no longer felt powerless in the face of my parents' behavior. The boundaries I had established, the support system I had activated, and the clarity I had gained about the patterns all contributed to a new sense of agency. Whatever came next, whether genuine change from my parents or continued resistance, I was equipped to handle it in a way that prioritized my children's emotional well-being above all else. That knowledge alone provided a measure of peace amid the ongoing turbulence of family conflict. The gentle spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of my home office as I reviewed the final details for Emma's 9th birthday celebration. 1 year had passed since the Hawaii trip that had catalyzed such significant changes in our family dynamics. Looking back now, with the perspective time provides, I could see that moment as the necessary fracture that ultimately created space for healing, though not in the way I had initially hoped. The 3-week pause in contact with my parents had extended far beyond the originally planned time frame. Despite the agreed-upon follow-up call scheduled for late June of last year, my parents had called 2 days after our initial conversation, insisting they had reflected enough and were ready to resume normal interactions. When I reiterated the need for the full 3-week period, my mother had become indignant, my father resigned, and they had ultimately declared they would not be held hostage to my unreasonable demands. What followed was a series of escalating boundary violations, unannounced visits to the house that I refused to acknowledge, attempts to contact Emma and Jackson through their school, promptly thwarted by the administration, who respected my instructions, and a particularly disturbing incident where my mother waited outside Jackson's soccer practice, approaching him when he emerged with his team. I had arrived just in time to intervene, ushering a confused Jackson to the car while my mother called after us that she just wanted to give him a birthday present. That incident had necessitated another difficult conversation with the children about why they wouldn't be seeing their grandparents for a while. Daniel had joined me for this discussion, providing a united front as we explained in age-appropriate terms that sometimes adults need to take breaks from each other to figure out how to interact in healthier ways. But what did we do wrong? Jackson had asked. His small face crumpled, with the confusion and self-blame that children so often assume in family conflicts. Absolutely nothing, Daniel had assured him firmly. This is entirely about adult issues, not about you or Emma. There are certain ways Grandma and Grandpa have been acting that Mom and I don't think are good for you, and until they can change those behaviors, we need to have some distance. Like, a timeout? Emma had suggested, drawing on a familiar concept. Something like that, I had agreed, grateful for the simple but accurate parallel. A timeout for grown-ups to think about their actions and how they affect others. Following the soccer field incident, Rebecca had helped me draft a cease and desist letter, formally notifying my parents that any further attempts to contact the children without my explicit permission would result in legal action. It was a step I had never imagined taking, but their escalating behavior had left me no choice. The letter had the intended effect. The direct boundary violations stopped, though they were replaced by more indirect approaches. Messages conveyed through Scott, complaints to mutual acquaintances designed to reach me eventually, even a tearful phone. Call to Grandma Ellie seeking her intervention. My grandmother, true to her word, had maintained her support of my position, telling my mother plainly that she had created this situation through years of preferential treatment and could only resolve it through genuine acknowledgement and change. Summer had given way to fall, and still, no real progress had been made. My parents maintained their position that they had done nothing wrong, that I was overreacting to perceived slights, and that my dictatorial boundaries were the real problem. Scott had gradually reduced his involvement as mediator, recognizing the no-win position it put him in, though he occasionally passed along updates about his parents' mindset or reported things they had asked him to tell me. Through it all, I maintained the boundaries I had established, neither hardening them out of anger nor softening them out of guilt. Dr. Fisher, the therapist Dr. Patel had recommended, had been instrumental in helping me navigate this prolonged estrangement, providing tools for managing my own emotional responses and strategies for supporting Emma and Jackson through the confusing absence of grandparents who had previously been present, if inconsistently so. The most important thing, Dr. Fisher had emphasized in one particularly helpful session, is that your children understand this isn't about them. They need to know they aren't responsible for the conflict and that they aren't being punished by the absence of their grandparents. I had taken this guidance to heart, ensuring that both children had regular opportunities to process their feelings about the situation, ask questions, and express any confusion or sadness they experienced. These conversations revealed that, contrary to my fears, they had been more aware of the differential treatment than I had realized. Grandma always likes Max and Ava and Lily's pictures better, Emma had observed matter-of-factly during one such discussion. She says wow and amazing for theirs, but just nice for mine, even when I work really hard. And they never stay. For my whole t-ball game, Jackson had added. But they go to all of Max's baseball and they cheer really loud. Their perceptions confirmed what I had documented, the subtle but consistent messaging that conveyed their lesser status in their grandparents' eyes. Hearing them articulate these observations strengthened my resolve to maintain the protective boundaries until genuine change occurred. The holiday season has presented particular challenges. Thanksgiving and Christmas had traditionally involved extended family gatherings that now required careful navigation. For Thanksgiving, we had accepted an invitation from Daniel's sister Beth, creating new traditions with the side of the family that had consistently demonstrated equal love and attention to both children. For Christmas, Lauren had included us. In her family's celebration, her parents warmly embracing Emma and Jackson as honorary grandchildren. Through careful planning and the support of our chosen family, We had created meaningful, joy-filled celebrations that minimized the absence of my parents, while demonstrating to Emma and Jackson that they were surrounded by people who valued them deeply. The new year had brought an unexpected development. In early January, I had received a formal letter from my parents, not a legal document, but a carefully composed message that acknowledged for the first time that perhaps they had shown some unconscious preferences in how they engaged with their grandchildren. The letter stopped short of a full admission of the pattern I had documented, but it represented a significant shift from the complete denial they had maintained for months. The letter had concluded with a request to begin reunification counseling with a family therapist of my choosing, with the goal of eventually rebuilding relationships with Emma and Jackson. After consultation with Dr. Fisher and Dr. Martinez, I had cautiously agreed, with clear conditions about the process and expected outcomes. The initial session in February had been tense but productive. My parents had arrived with a defensive posture that gradually softened as the therapist, Dr. Anita Wilson, skillfully guided the conversation away from blame and toward understanding of impact. By the session's end, my father had made a statement that suggested real potential for change. "I never thought about how it might look from Emma and Jackson's perspective," he had admitted quietly. "We just fell into patterns that seemed natural at the time." I'm starting to see that natural doesn't mean right or fair. My mother had remained more resistant, but even she had acknowledged that some of their actions could have been handled differently. It was a modest concession, but in the context of her previous absolute refusal to consider any wrongdoing, it represented meaningful movement. We had continued with bi-weekly sessions throughout the spring, gradually establishing new understanding and expectations. Progress was neither linear nor guaranteed. Some sessions ended with breakthrough moments of genuine insight, others with my mother retreating into defensive positions or my father's passive acceptance of whatever direction the wind blew. But overall, the trajectory was toward greater awareness and accountability. In late April, we had reached a significant milestone when my parents completed the grandparent reflection exercise Dr. Wilson had assigned, a detailed review of their interactions with all 5 grandchildren over the past year, with specific attention to time spent, resources provided, communication patterns, and expressed interest in each child's unique qualities and interests. The completed exercise had revealed disparities even they couldn't deny. 37 interactions with Scott's children compared to 8 with mine, prior to the estrangement. Gifts, for Scott's children averaging triple the value of those given to Emma and Jackson, and a pattern of initiating conversations about Max, Ava, and Lily's interests and activities, while rarely asking about Emma and Jackson's. I never realized it. "Was this imbalanced?" my father had said, genuine shock evident in his voice as he reviewed the documented patterns. "When you look at it all together like this." "We've always loved all our grandchildren," my mother had insisted, though her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. "We never meant to make Emma and Jackson feel less important. Intent and impact are different things," I had reminded her gently, echoing the phrase I had used in our initial confrontation. "Whatever your intentions, the impact on Emma and Jackson was harmful. That's what matters most." Now, a year after the Hawaii vacation that had prompted my intervention, we were approaching a carefully structured reintroduction between my parents and my children. The birthday celebration I was planning for Emma would include a brief visit from my parents, their first direct contact with the children in nearly a year. The visit would be hosted at a neutral location, a local park, limited to 1 hour, and supervised by both Daniel and me. Dr. Wilson had helped establish clear guidelines for the interaction, including specific prohibitions against comparative language, discussions of the past estrangement, or attempts to elicit sympathy from the children. My parents had accepted these conditions without protest, a promising sign of their evolving understanding of the boundaries I had established. They had even asked for guidance on appropriate gifts, acknowledging their tendency toward extravagance. with Scott's children while exercising more restraint with mine. As I finalized the arrangements for Emma's birthday celebration, I reflected on the journey of the past year, the painful confrontations, the difficult boundaries, the gradual, incremental progress toward healthier family dynamics. The outcome wasn't what I had initially hoped for when I sent that first boundary-setting email. I had wanted acknowledgement, apology, and immediate change, a neat resolution to years of imbalance. Reality had proven messier, the path more circuitous. The complete rupture that followed my initial boundary setting had been neither planned nor desired, but it had created the necessary crisis that eventually led to genuine reconsideration of long-standing patterns. The healing that was now cautiously beginning wasn't a return to the previous relationship, but the creation of something new. Something with potential to be healthier for everyone involved, especially Emma and Jackson. My phone chimed with a text from Daniel, confirming he would pick up the birthday cake at 2 p.m. tomorrow. His consistent support throughout this challenging year had deepened our co-parenting partnership in ways neither of us had anticipated. Though our marriage had ended, our commitment to protecting and nurturing our children had created a different kind of family bond, one based on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering prioritization of Emma and Jackson's well-being. Another text arrived, this one from Lauren, asking if she should bring the outdoor games she had offered for the party. I confirmed gratefully, appreciating once again how our chosen family had stepped up during this difficult period, providing the children with consistent examples of the unconditional love and attention they deserved. A knock at the doorframe drew my attention from the screen. Emma stood there, school backpack still slung over one shoulder. "Mom, can I ask you something about tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She entered the office, perching on the edge of the chair across from my desk. "Are you sure Grandma and Grandpa are really coming to my party?" The question revealed the lingering uncertainty created by my parents' previous pattern of unreliability. Even with all our careful preparation for this reintroduction, Emma remained skeptical of their commitment, a painful reminder of the damage done by years of differential treatment. "Yes, they've confirmed they'll be there," I assured her. "For the park portion of the celebration, as we discussed." She nodded, processing this information. "And they know it's just for an hour, right? They won't be upset when they have to leave?" "They understand completely," I said, meeting her concerned gaze directly. "Everything has been arranged very clearly, and they've agreed to all the details." "Okay." She seemed relieved, though not entirely convinced. "I just don't want anyone to be mad at my party." "No one will be mad," I promised, moving around the desk to sit beside her. "Dad and I will be there the whole time, and if anything feels uncomfortable for any reason, we can make adjustments. Your birthday is about celebrating you, not managing adult relationships." She leaned against me slightly, her slender body relaxing. "I'm glad you and Dad will both be there." "Always," I assured her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That's something you never have to doubt." After she left to start her homework, I returned to my party preparations with renewed purpose. The past year had been challenging in ways I never anticipated when I first confronted my parents about the Hawaii trip. The path had been neither straight nor smooth, and the destination remained somewhat uncertain. But sitting here now, finalizing plans for a celebration where my daughter felt secure enough to express her concerns directly, where my co-parent remained steadfastly supportive despite our changed relationship, where chosen family would gather alongside biological relatives to honor a child they all genuinely valued, I knew the difficult journey had been worthwhile. The boundaries I had established had created space for truth, for accountability, and potentially for healthier relationships going forward. They had demonstrated to Emma and Jackson that they deserved to be treated with consistent care and consideration, not merely accommodated when convenient or overshadowed by cousins deemed somehow more deserving of attention. Most importantly, they had broken a generational pattern that might otherwise have continued indefinitely, teaching my children that love should be demonstrated through actions, not just claimed in words, and that their worth was inherent, not dependent on favorable comparison to others. As I placed Emma's carefully selected birthday gifts in decorative bags, I thought about the Hawaiian shell necklaces my parents had brought back as consolation prizes for the children they'd excluded from their family vacation. Those token gestures had once seemed sufficient compensation for deeper exclusion, moments of apparent thoughtfulness that masked the underlying pattern of favoritism. Emma and Jackson deserved better, not necessarily more expensive gifts or grander gestures, but genuine presence, consistent reliability, and clear messaging that they were valued exactly as they were. The boundaries I had established were designed to create space for exactly that kind of authentic connection, not the performance of love without its substance. Tomorrow's birthday celebration would be a small but significant step toward that ideal. A carefully structured opportunity for my parents to demonstrate a different approach to their relationship with my children. Whether they could maintain that approach over time remained to be seen, but the foundation had been laid for something healthier than what had come before. As I finished the party preparations and went to help the children with homework and dinner, I carried with me the hard-won wisdom of the past year, that sometimes the most loving choice is to establish firm boundaries, even when doing so creates temporary discord. That patterns established over decades require sustained effort to change, not just momentary awareness. That protecting my children's sense of self-worth might mean making difficult, painful choices about family relationships. And perhaps most importantly, that family is ultimately defined not by biology or obligation, but by consistent demonstrations of genuine care, respect, and love. A truth I would continue to model for Emma and Jackson in the days, months, and years ahead, whatever path my relationship with my parents ultimately took. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.